Today we're going to show the counter example in an Android app. So this is an Android emulator. I laid it on its side so it would fit in this window. And basically, this is the counter example Android app modified in a way that when we press this plus button, the increment button inside the Flutter app, it's actually going to send a message to the Android app, and the Android app's going to log it to the console. And then if we press anywhere not in this app, which in this case turns out to be this area at the bottom, because I didn't use fragments because this is the exact same sample that Google provides where they don't support, in the example, it takes over the whole screen, and the whole screen is everywhere but the little bar where you can, flip up to see the home screen. And so if I increment here, if I click outside the Flutter app, outside here, and I don't know if I'll get to the code in this video or another one, it'll actually send a message to the Flutter app to do an increment operation, and then when that increments, it'll send a message back, or send a message to the Android app, and the Android app will log that it was increment. So we have two messages, was incremented and increment. So let me show you how this is going to work. So we have the floating action button in the Flutter app, which was the plus button. When you press it, there's an onPress handler. The onPress handler actually calls increment, which increments the counter, and when the counter is incremented, it does a post an event on the basic message channel that says it was incremented. And then the Android app actually picks that up in a message handler on the basic message channel, and it logs it. The alternative is that we have an on-touch event, right? Because I did this without a fragment. And so the only area that's clickable is the area outside the Flutter, which is actually the little bar area. You can click in that, and that'll be an on-touch event because there's no button there, and that will post an event to the basic message channel with the increment command. The increment command will be picked up by a message listener in the Flutter app. The Flutter app will then call increment the same way it did when the Flutter button. That'll increment the counter, that'll cause a post event to happen, and then the Android app will actually get a message that says it was incremented. So so we kind of have a symmetrical version of this where we can do an on-touch in the Android app, or we can do a floating button. The area, like I said, that we need to click on is this area here outside of the Flutter area of the screen. Anywhere off the screen will work for this example. So let me pull, actually, you know what, let me hide this. So this is the log area. We could use the log cat screen area in the Android IDE, right? But I didn't do that here. And actually, I had kind of hoped to, you know what, let me see if I can get this guy to come down just a little bit here. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a super tiny log area, and that's because I did this in a 720 screen. And I wanted to make this clear so I could clear it. So if I press the button, plus, what happens? We see debug log from the Android emulator. Anywhere you see D, it's going to be the debug log, and it's the Android device. We see Android received incremented, and that's because it received it on the basic message channel, right? So every time I click plus here, we get an incremented, and the other interesting thing you see here is Android received a message from the Flutter. So we actually have the Android app doing a toast, right? So every time we click the button here, it increments the counter publishes a message, and the Android device logs it here and pops a toast. So let's clear that. Let's go back to the emulator. So now if I were to click out here, we see a different message, right? What happens is in the Android device, we had the onPressed handler for the area not controlled by Flutter, which is only this area at the bottom. Flutter received an action from Android. Android published a message. The message was received by Flutter. Flutter did the increment operation, and then Flutter actually published a message called incremented to the basic message channel. Android picked that up and then logged it. So if we look here, though, you can see it says Android received. So we actually have the Android things actually doing two things. It's logging to its debug log, which you can see here that it received a message, and the Android is then popping the toast. So let's clear this one more time. We'll look at it one more, and then this demo will be over, and I'll create another video for the code, maybe when I get my act together. So here we have a 6, You can see incremented, the count is 7. This is like the web version we did, right? And the toast popped because every time we log this to debug, we also show the toast. So let me clear that. You know what, we'll leave it. And when I click outside, so you can see the messages between the two are different, right? We didn't actually log in the Flutter app. The one we pressed the button, I probably should have. But in this case, we saw the first message. Android received a message that we were incremented to 7. In this case, on the second press outside, we did an action was down. That's the onPressed handler that actually publishes a message that Flutter receives that says to do an increment, and the source was Android instead of Flutter. And I'm using JSON here so that I get good messages. And then after that was incremented, we get a message back to date. So you can see every time we get an increment, the count goes up, what Android gets told about. So this is super simple, no fragments. Why no fragments? Because that's the way that the Flutter folks created the sample, and if we wanted actual buttons in this area, we would do this in fragments. I'm going to try and do that in another one. So that's all I got. And I'm going to do a second video with this, with the code, I think. Have a great day. Oh, where's the repo? Duh. Let me see. The repo, as usual, is this GitHub repo here, FreemanSoft Flutter Embedded. And there's a V1, and it lets you run the web app and the Android app. Now I'm really done. Have a great day.